today we're going to start with a really embarrassing story about Carmen. Not our Carmen, the Carmen, the woman in the opera. But let me tell you, sometimes when you're a speaker, you just know when you've got everybody paying attention. And as soon as I had that opening line, you're all there like this. Shame on you. Carmen is, like most operas, not a happy story. It's about a woman who generates love and jealousy and obsession, and there is no happy ending because, after all, it is an opera. But there are two main characters in this story other than Carmen herself. One is a soldier, and the other is a bullfighter. Now, it's interesting because several years ago in Spain, there was a production of the opera, and in the story itself, Don Jose, one of the main characters, he has a lot to say at the beginning of the production, and then there's this big lull, and he doesn't have to be back until sometime later. He's got time. So in costume, he goes to a nearby tavern thinking he's going to have a couple of drinks because, after all, there's nothing else to do to put in the time. And at that point in the story, he's dressed as a bit of a ruffian. So he's disheveled and he doesn't look very presentable and he's on the streets. And the cops pick him up. They think he's a vagrant. So they're about to throw him in jail. And he says, "You can't put me in jail. I'm a great opera singer." And at that point, they're ready to add the charge of intoxication to his bill. And so finally, as they're about to put him in the carouser, he says, "I can settle this easily." And he starts to sing. And of course, it became very evident very quickly that he really was an opera singer and that he was telling the truth. True story. That really struck me when I heard the story this week about how we ourselves are often going to be in tight situations, and our ability to prove who we really are will become core. It will be absolutely essential. Because you know what? You can tell people who you are till you're blue in the face. But the only way you can really demonstrate who you are, what your identity is, why you're here, that sense of purpose and destination, that can only happen when the chips are down. And then people are going to find out if you really are as you portray yourself. And this is relevant because we're going to deal today with the story about how Jesus chooses the inner circle, about how he picks 12 men to be his constant companions. He's going to mentor them. He's going to lead them. He's going to rely on them to carry on after he's done his work. And there are powerful lessons for us in this story. But let me just start with this question. If you were going to change the world, let's assume you had some skills, you had some abilities, you had some visions about what this world needed, and you were going to set out to do that. If you were going to make this a better place, what kind of people would you surround yourself with? What sorts of characteristics would you be looking for? Tell me that. Integrity. You need people you can trust. What else? Sorry? Positivity. Yeah, if you're surrounded by negativity all the time, it becomes absolutely toxic and harrowing, and you just can't do anything with that. Hard workers. If you're going to change the world, it's not going to happen easily or quickly. And you need people that are going to stick it out, people who will be there in thick and thin, people that you can count on. What else? Honesty. That's right. You can't have people who are duplicitous or deceitful. You've got to have people that you know are as they present themselves. But we're missing some big ones. Think big here. You're wanting to change the world. What do you need to do that? Let's be realistic. Integrity enough is not going to do it. Honesty is not just going to cut it on its own. What else do you need? All right, you're going to need worshipers of God, but if you're not changing the world in a spiritual way, that's not necessarily going to be the case. But I'm getting to that. That's an essential point. What else? Non-judgmental people. Nope, you can change the world and have the most judgmental people on your side. You're just not going to change it for the better. Of course, you're right. What else? Like-mindedness. Yeah. If you're not on the same page, if you're not like-minded, then you're not going to be able to accomplish anything you need to accomplish because everybody will have their own idea as to what this needs to look like. But we're missing some big ones. Generosity, oh, you guys are just way less cynical than I am, I guess. Because you're thinking of all the positive things, and all those things are absolutely true. But look, the reality is, if you were going to change the world in a meaningful way today, you would need money, you would need power, you would need influence, you would need some way to control more than you control right now. You need a plan. Absolutely. It's interesting. Jesus takes all of the things that the world would do differently, turns it on its head, and manages to make this work. Because, as Diane pointed out, he's not interested in changing the world in terms of the physical needs or the material ones. He's not looking for power. He's looking for love in all the right places. He's going to change the world with a group of men who have nothing to offer compared to the kinds of people that we would go looking for today if we had a major project that was really going to make it essential for them to do their jobs in a huge way. What does Jesus go looking for? Even before we look at the text as to who he checks, what do you think Jesus is looking for in his followers?
People he can mold.
Yeah, you have to be teachable. You have to be moldable. You have to be available. I'll say it again. God is more interested in your availability than your ability. That's right. He will use you the way only he can and will use you. But you have to be up for that. Nobody is going to force you to do the right thing. And that includes God. That includes God. So yeah, we need to have that honesty and the generosity that you mentioned. We need to have that transparency. There has to be a plan. But what else does Jesus look for when he's picking this group of men that will transform everything? They have to be faithful. That is so important. You can't have people that are going to bail. And that's where we know that he's done his job right. Because when Jesus molds these people, when he does everything he does for them, when they have to handle things on their own, when he's out of the picture, when he's gone back to God, they stick it out. They see it through. Every one of those 12 men gave their lives for their faith, except for John, who died an old, faithful man. Yeah, they saw it through to the end. That's going to be so important for the church and for you. And we have to be the same people too, because we tend to think, all right, Jesus is picking these 12 men, and that's essentially important. Of course it is. But we need to also understand that we are chosen as well. And I don't mean eeny, meeny, miny, mo, or that God in a cosmic way decides ahead of time who's saved and who's not. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the fact that if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, if you have turned your life voluntarily over to God, then you have been chosen for a purpose. The purpose is to glorify God, to build up your brothers and sisters, and to reach out with the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. But how that looks in your life is not necessarily the way it's going to look in my life or anybody else's. You have specific talents, specific contacts, specific abilities that only you can use in your circle, and Jesus is going to help you do that. But we have to be, first of all, sensing the calling to begin with. Then we have to respond to that calling in a very significant and meaningful way. That's what we're called to. Let's go to Mark chapter 3, and this is exactly what the text says. Now remember, there's been this big controversy over whether Jesus should be able to heal on the Sabbath. He kind of puts the religious people in their place, and then it goes on to talk about choosing the 12. This is verse 13. Jesus went up to a mountain and called out the ones he wanted to go with him. How'd you like to be one of those people? You go up to the mountain, Jesus is there, he says, yep, you. He calls to him those he wants to go with him. And they came to him. And then he appointed 12 of them and called them his apostles. So there are more followers at this point, way more followers than the 12, but these are the people he has a special mission for. He appoints 12, called them his apostles. The best equivalent word in our language for apostle would be missionary. These are people that are going to be sent out. That's the meaning of the word. He's going to send them out into the world in many, many ways. You are an apostle of Jesus Christ. You are sent out to do his will and his work. They were to accompany him, and he would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. And these are the 12 he chose. Simon, whom he called Peter, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Remember, they were the fisher people. But Jesus nicknamed them sons of thunder. I'm not sure why. James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Then Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who would later betray him. Let's just go back to some of the things I've said. First of all, when you look at the idea that these men are so broad in their experience and their backgrounds and everything else, it's a wonder they were able to work together in the first place. It really is a wonder they could work together in the first place. First of all, we know that they had vastly different personalities. All you have to do is look at Peter and Thomas, both of whom seem to be very brash. They just act on impulse. Peter's always putting his foot in his mouth. Thomas, by the way, if you think he's only the guy who's doubting Thomas, let me remind you that at one point when Jesus says he's ready to go to Jerusalem and the other guys are saying, "No way, Lord, they're going to kill you if you do that," it's Thomas who says, "All right, I'm ready, let's go." He's in, and he's all in. Now, you contrast that kind of brashness that you get with Peter and Thomas with, well, let's go with Andrew. Every time we see Andrew, he is introducing somebody to Jesus, but he's not one of those guys that's up front. He's the one who brings Peter to Jesus. Andrew is the one who brings the boy with the loaves and fishes to Jesus. He is the guy who sees the potential, who understands the situation and what Jesus can do with it, and then acts on that. But he is not a guy who wants the limelight. That's not who he is. Economic status, well, we know that when James and John were called, it says that they responded. They left. They left the boats and they went with Jesus. But we're also told that the servants stayed in the boat. So if you got servants at that day and age, you got money. Now, they were probably a little bit of a rarity because, well, really, that area of the country was known to be the sticks. It didn't have a lot, and that's one of the reasons why it was despised. But there are men here who are used to having money and power and influence. But that certainly was not the case all the way around. Then if you've got different personalities, and you've got definite differences in their economic status, what about politics? What about politics? Well, there are two people here that kind of illustrate my point. The first of them is Levi or Matthew. What was his job? He was a tax collector. And what did people think of tax collectors? They were traitors. They were collaborators. They were despised. Simon the Zealot. What do you know about the Zealots? Who were the Zealots? They hated Rome. They were known to be even assassins. As I told you before, they would wait until the markets were crowded. Then they would walk in with their little daggers. Some of them were called Sicarii, named after these daggers. They would stab the Romans when there was lots of commotion, then disappear into the crowd. These were political extremists who were super nationalistic. Now you've got a tax collector that works with Rome, trying to get along with a guy who is considered by most people in the country to be a traitor. And yet it works. It works. I don't know how they managed to do that, but it works. Spirituality? Well, we tend to think that these guys must have had it all together or Jesus wouldn't have called them in the first place, right? Well, you know that ultimately it's Judas Iscariot that betrays Jesus. But if you go to John chapter 12 and look in verse 6, we also learn that Judas is the man who took care of the money that those 12 men had. He was the keeper of the purse. And we're also told in that context that he used to dip in regularly and steal money for himself. So here's my question for you. Did Jesus simply not know what was going on? I think we can probably assume that Jesus did know that this man's character was what it was. So here's the big thing. Why would Jesus pull somebody like that into his inner circle? Why would you do that? Well, if he didn't want to train him in the right way, it only worked partially. Because we know he goes on to betray Jesus. But I think what we're seeing here, going to your point, is that he's giving this man a chance, even though he knows that it's going to be a struggle. I think probably Jesus knows in the end he's still going to be the one that betrays him. But yeah, I would like to think Jesus is wanting this man to have an opportunity to change. What else? What are the other possibilities? Why choose this man?
Because it shows how much he loves us regardless of who we are.
And isn't that such a powerful thing? If you didn't hear that, Jesus chooses Judas to demonstrate that he loves us anyway. And isn't that good news for you and for me? Yeah. You know what? When you are called, when you answer the call of the gospel, Jesus doesn't say, well, forget it, Brenda. I've seen what you're up to. Maybe he should, but he doesn't. And he doesn't do that with any of us. The whole point is that, yes, we are loved unconditionally, and we can change, and we will change if we're willing. But even among the 12, God is not going to make Judas do anything Judas doesn't want to do. God did not make him become what he should be. God did not make him betray Jesus. He simply used what was in the heart of this man. He will use what's in your heart and mine. Linda says maybe he was trying to teach the group how to love one another. It's got to be deliberate, don't you think? I mean, really, putting Judas among the other guys, putting Simon and Levi together, that's not a mistake. It's not random. It's absolutely intentional. And one of the reasons is that Jesus knows that ultimately we're going to be in a church where absolutely everything we've talked about so far is the reality. Look around, ladies and gentlemen. There are people who are a different demographic, people who have different interests, personalities, skill sets, politics, and visions. The one thing that saves this for all of us is that we have one heart, one mind, one purpose, and that's what we're called to. You don't have to be like me. You can thank God for that. I don't have to be like you. We can be who we are and still be united in Christ, because if we focus on the things that matter, that will take care of everything else that does not matter. I can say to you, I don't like your politics, but I love you. I can say to you, you don't have the same skills as I do, but I'm really grateful for that because you can do things I can't do. I can say to you, I'm grateful for your spirituality because I have been able to see things that I don't have, that I need, because you have modeled that for me. That's why this powerful story is here, to teach us that we can be different and still be one. That the church can be different and the world can still be one. If we're serious about the mission that Jesus brings to us, and it's got nothing to do with making sure that everybody thinks and sees everything the way I do, or has the same emphasis that I feel in my life. We are not ever going to be so similar that it'll be like God pulled out the cloning machine. And I am grateful for that. I see so many times when so many churches are anxious to make everybody basically the same. Never going to happen. The message, the mission, the mandate, that stays the same. That's not going to change. But we get to approach things in our own way, and we have freedom in Christ to do that. And for that, I am really grateful. But it's not all hearts around the page, I'm afraid. If you continue on in the story in Mark chapter 3, we see that Jesus already, having just chosen the inner circle, already he's getting grief. One time, Jesus entered a house and the crowds began to gather, and some of his disciples couldn't even find time to eat, and neither could Jesus. When his family heard what was happening, they tried to take him away. He's out of his mind, they said. Now I'm going to come back to that. But the teachers of religious law had arrived from Jerusalem. Now, they've been sent from headquarters. Jerusalem is the be-all and the end-all, the center of the universe for Jews. So they've sent the big guys from head office to check this man out. Yep, they say he's possessed by Satan, prince of the devils. That's where he gets his power from, to cast out demons. So they look at the possessions, they look at the healings, and they say, yeah, the only reason he can do this is because the devil is with him. Jesus called them over and responded with an illustration. He said, "How can Satan cast out Satan? A kingdom divided by civil war will collapse. Similarly, a family splintered by feuding will fall apart. And if Satan is divided and fights against himself, how can he stand? He would never survive." Let me illustrate this further. Who is powerful enough to enter the house of a strong man and plunder his goods? Only someone even stronger, someone who could tie him up and then plunder his house. I tell you the truth, all sin and blasphemy can be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. This is the sin with eternal consequences. He told them this because they were saying, he's possessed by an evil spirit. Wow, lots to unpack there. We're not going to do this in detail today, but let me start with this. Jesus is so busy, so popular. He's got a reputation for healing that is so powerful now that he can't even find time to eat because so many people are coming to the door. His family shows up. We're told his mother's probably among them. And so they're saying, we got to get this guy out of here. He's lost it. He's out of his mind. Can you tell me why you think his family thought he was crazy? Why did they react this way? He's doing things they're not used to seeing anywhere else. He's healing the sick. He's casting out demons. He's doing his thing in a way that nobody else had ever done before. Now, this is someone they know. I'll get to Mary in a minute, but I want you to think about his brothers and sisters. We know that Jesus had brothers, several sisters. We don't even have the names of the sisters. But he comes from a large family. They do not believe that he is the Messiah. In the early days, they just don't believe. If you go to the Gospel of John, we're told that during what we now know as Hanukkah, the family is kind of taunting him. His brothers say, well, look, if you really want to be well known, you should go to Jerusalem during the feast and just let everybody see your great power. They don't believe in him for one little bit. But then they change their tune dramatically, don't they? Because we're told that when Jesus is ascending, when he's in the upper room in Acts, his brothers are there. Why? How do we go from this guy is just totally out to lunch to I'm in? During his lifetime, they do not believe that there's anything special about Jesus. That tells me that he did no miracles at home. You know, all those apocryphal stories about the tools in his workshop speaking to him and Jesus doing all these miracles didn't happen. How do we know that? Well, because if he had done miracles at home as a kid, his brothers would have known something was up, and they apparently do not. Now, we're told in John that when Jesus turns the water into wine, that is the first miracle he does publicly. I suspect that's the first miracle he does, period. The whole point is he's now demonstrating his power. They don't know what to make of this. All of a sudden, this guy that they grew up with, he's surrounded by these adoring crowds who seem to think that he's got power. So their conclusion is he's out of his mind. By the way, this is something that's quite common in the New Testament. When Paul begins his work, he's hauled before the Jewish authorities and then the Roman governor, a guy by the name of Festus, and he's preaching to him. Festus says, Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning has made you crazy. And Paul has to reply in Acts 26, no, that's simply not true. I'm simply telling you what the prophets and Moses have said all along, and I'm not telling you anything that is not the truth. But that's the automatic response. When people are challenged, when people see things they don't understand or that they don't like, if they cannot question the reality of the situation, they are going to question your motives and they're going to question your character. The same has happened to me. It will happen to you if it has not already. And that's exactly what these religious leaders are doing. Now, Mary knows that Jesus is not ordinary. Mary knows because of the revelation of the angel and because of everything she's been told when he goes to the temple. Mary knows that Jesus is the Son of God. It says that she treasured these things in her heart. Either she did not try to convince the siblings of Jesus, or maybe they didn't listen to her. But we cannot conclude for any length of time that Mary did not fully understand what was up. She might not have known the whole story, but she knew that Jesus was the Son of the Most High. But getting other people to believe that was the hard part. It will be the same for you. And when you try to be the representative of Jesus Christ, when you seek to be his ambassador, when you answer the call to be what God intends you to be, some people in your life are not going to understand, and they're not going to like it. And they will sometimes ascribe terrible motives. Sometimes people will think you're crazy too, that you're deluded. I don't think many people are going to chalk it up to demon possession, although I will tell you that I've had people tell me to my face that I am demon possessed because I'm leading all you people straight to hell. Had a meeting once with a guy who, he starts out and he wanted me to join his church to help them work. And then I said, well, you better find out what I believe. And they thought that maybe I'd changed my mind on some things because I knew these people from before. And when they found out that I still believed what I believed, that was the answer. He said, you're a liar. I said, what do you mean I'm a liar? He said, well, you call yourselves followers of Christ, but you're not following Christ and you're leading your people straight to hell. So, yeah, sometimes people are going to come for you. Sometimes they're going to come for you, especially if they don't understand where you're coming from. I think it's fair to look at somebody objectively and to say, okay, let's just examine why these people are doing and saying what they are. That's completely legitimate. And that's why this story about the 12 is so powerful, because at the end, when the chips are down, they all decide that they are going to live out their faith even though it costs them their lives. Would you do that? You know, I've often asked myself, could I die for my faith? The truthful, candid answer is, I don't know. I'd love to think I could, but the reality is, if somebody was going to torture me, could I follow through? I don't know. But it's a sobering thought, isn't it? Just how far would you go to pay for your faith, to stand by your convictions, to live out who you say you are? Wow, let's hope we never have to find out. But I'll take you back to the original point, and that is that we have been called by God. We have been called together to be the people of God in this particular place. And that means that we have work to do. And we have to do that work while we're all practicing the kind of characteristics that you identified for me earlier. Things like honesty and generosity and faith and perseverance. And we get our example from Jesus himself and from his first followers, because that is what set them apart. Every one of them was willing to go to their torturous death because of what they believed. Why? Well, because they had seen the evidence themselves. They saw Jesus come back from the dead. So if you are firmly convinced that that is the reality, that Jesus is alive today, that should be all we need to carry through and to carry on with what we're called to do. So let me sum it up this way. The good news is, even when there are people who are questioning what they see in you, you probably aren't going to have to sing to prove who you are. But like Don Jose, we all have to be in harmony. We have to be in harmony with God. We have to be in harmony with Jesus Christ. And if we can do that, then we too can be people of God through whom people see the love and the Spirit of our gracious Father. Only in this opera, there's a real happy ending.